Is real life boring after you've been maladaptive daydreaming or you've been addicted to daydreaming? Somebody raised this in my comments saying that they were desperate to try and stop maladaptive daydreaming, but when they did stop, they were bored and unhappy. And I think this is a really real concern for people who are struggling with maladaptive daydreaming. And not only is it a concern, but a lot of times it is really the reality. So I just wanted to speak about sense of mixed feelings that we have about, our ability to maladaptive daydream and our desire to want to stop, but wanting to stop, but also maybe not wanting to stop, and just like the confusing feelings that I think go along with this. So for a lot of people, if you daydream excessively and you realise that you're struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, if you start to look that up and you're researching about this, then you've probably recognised you've got a problem, and you've probably recognised it's like taking over your life and you want to stop it, and you think stopping daydreaming is going to like give you back a more real, engaging life. Now, I think you need to think about like why you're daydreaming in the first place, and like once the daydreaming stops, what are you left with? Because a lot of times we're, daydreaming to cover up our problems. We're daydreaming because of trauma, because of boredom for a lot of people, because of depression, because, of wanting to escape. So, what are we wanting to escape from, and what is like the underlying root cause? If we don't know that, when we stop maladaptive daydreaming, we're just going to end up in a really uncomfortable situation unless we know what it is we want to stop for and what our life is going to be without daydreaming. I think the reality is that life is more boring without being able to daydream, because daydreaming, you can, put yourself into scenarios, you can experience emotions that you can't experience in real life, you can have connections you can't experience in real life, you can have relationships that you can't experience in real life, and you take all that away and you are left with just yourself, if that is the situation. And that is the situation for me. Like, I'm just myself, and I did daydream a lot more, exciting things happening to me, or, being a more important person, being in relationships, or, being other people. And, that was like really took up so much of my life. So, I always had this feeling if I was able to stop maladaptive daydreaming, I would live a fuller life, and I would be more engaged, and I would want to socialise more, and I would get out of interactions more, and I could be more genuine. Now, that really hasn't happened. I am still like an introverted person. I am more like keep to myself, and I'm always thinking about creativity and writing. Now, these kind of things don't really match up with like being able to speak to people in everyday life and feeling the urge to like do exciting things. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is like you are likely to be left with who you are. You're not going to be a different person because you shake the maladaptive daydreaming. Like, you've got to think, who am I when I stop, and am I bored when I stop? And I suppose what I've found is that you actually just need to accept the boredom and turn the boredom into something positive and be a more calm, centered person who is just more comfortable with who they are by themselves, and not. I think for a lot of people, maladaptive daydreaming can be triggered, by anxiety, particularly if you have an anxiety disorder. It really will be triggered by anxiety. So whatever causes that anxiety, I think, is still going to cause that anxiety. And, maladaptive daydreaming is like the coping mechanism that you're going to. So I think if you are still wanting to push yourself into places that are uncomfortable, you probably need to accept the maladaptive daydreaming, or if you've stopped the maladaptive daydreaming, then you need to accept the discomfort. My situation is I've been taking medication for OCD, which has really helped stop the maladaptive daydreaming. But I think because, I've stopped the really, really compulsive urge to do it. But it doesn't mean that I don't, sometimes flit in my mind and think, I could be daydreaming right now. What difference does it make? And I kind of don't know if that's like my OCD speaking or if that's really how I feel, where it's like, well, actually, what difference does it make? And for me, I think, it's just a kind of dangerous path if you start to allow yourself to daydream. I do think it's one of these things like you need to kind of go cold turkey on, really, because if you start doing it, it's just so easy to get back into that habit. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's a compulsion on the one hand, it's also a habit. It's also like what you do with your time. It's also like what you do in your head when you're faced with difficult situations. So it's about breaking that habit, but you need to find, other ways you're going to deal with the situation, or become comfortable with taking yourself out of that situation and become comfortable with discomfort. I think I kind of practice this at work sometimes, where I know I'm in uncomfortable social situations where I would want to maladaptive daydream, and I can feel the pull towards that, and I really try to stop and be like, no, it's all right to feel uncomfortable, and I'll just feel uncomfortable and I'll just sit here, and it doesn't matter, because what I'm doing is like no different to how I'm perceived, and probably nobody is perceiving you. That's the thing. So whether I was daydreaming or whether I'm not daydreaming, it doesn't matter to what's around me, like what I think I'm protecting myself from. I'm really not, or I really don't need to. Like you can learn to sit in a discomfort. And the more you do that, like the easier it becomes. And that is the same with boredom. You need to, I think, like build up a more slow and intentional interest in things that maybe you're a bit erratic about. So, when you're maladaptive daydreaming, you pick up books, you still are probably maladaptive daydreaming, then you're reading some of it, and then, you're constantly, I think, fighting with your mind. And the same when you watch movies, and the same, when you're doing other things. And it's really about slowing down and being more intentional. So when you're reading a book, you really want to focus on that book, and it will feel uncomfortable. It will feel like less interesting. And that's where, I've made videos about this before, like where you really want to be looking towards high quality art and stories and movies, things that, really are being kind of tried and tested of being the best of the best, that should engage a person because they're doing the craft so well. So, I've been reading Shakespeare, and I think, if I was maladaptive daydreaming or whatever, I would probably find that boring because I would be kind of half doing it. And now the way I'm doing it is like I'm reading it very slowly. I'm thinking about the words, the word choices. I'm looking things up when I struggle to make sense of it. I'm writing notes when I see something inspiring. Like I'm just being so much slower and intentional, and I'm like building an experience out of something that I would almost just have been doing half of. So I think, in order to combat boredom, we need to sit in boredom and allow ourselves to be bored. And then, the more boring activities then become more engaging and more encompassing and more stimulating for our brain. If we're not constantly stimulating our brain with maladaptive daydreaming, we allow ourselves to sit in discomfort, to sit in boredom. Then when we do get a chance to like read something of high quality or watch something of high quality, we can, really appreciate taking that in. But I suppose, in terms of like boredom in life, your life is never going to be exciting as it is in daydreams if you are able to make, exciting daydreams, or daydreams, where you're like so much more confident and you're in your relationships, and you are a different person. I'm just having to like make peace, like, oh, I'll never experience that. And I honestly, that is more boring, but I just feel a lot calmer in my body and a lot more comfortable. I think like maladaptive daydream like really messes with this connection between your body and your mind. That is like, for me, I think the worst thing. And I think that's the thing that if somebody doesn't maladaptive daydream, they wouldn't understand, because it can literally kind of make you feel nauseous, because it's such a disconnect. And especially if you pace, or if you do things like you're disconnected really from any intention of what you're doing with your body. And that is where like you really need to slow down and feel that intention. And that's, obviously people talk about yoga and meditation, and like, obviously they're like cliches to talk about, but like the cliches are really true, in that that's like where you're going to find connection again with your body. And obviously for maladaptive daydreaming, we use music a lot, and that will trigger us into daydreams. But if you can find some songs that don't trigger your daydreams, or practice like putting on a song and dancing, or like moving your body to the music, or like feeling the music as yourself, the more time you can spend as yourself, like even though it's boring, like you need to sort of accept the boring if you are in that place where maladaptive daydreams just get out of control and you do want to stop. I think it's something you need to accept, and it's really, really difficult at first, because you're comparing a boring real life to really exciting daydreams. When you cut that down and then you kind of live in boredom, then you can lift yourself back up on the other side with things that are healthier, like reading, watching things, having a conversation where you're staying in the moment, sitting, doing meditation, doing yoga, like all these things, like they are boring. And that's just something that we need to accept. But they will also bring you a certain level of peace if you're able to achieve that. And I think, if you maladaptive daydream, like getting peace of mind is, such a gift. I think it really is. And also I just want to say, if you really, really struggle doing this kind of thing, then you may have a bigger problem. You may have a mental illness that is going to prevent you from ever going to be able to stop maladaptive daydreaming yourself, and you might need professional help. So I've made lots of videos on this as well, so don't think, if you really do struggle to do all this, this video is more for people who are able to stop maladaptive daydreaming, but they just find themselves bored, or they find themselves unhappy. And how you need to accept this level of boredom, and then find the things you can enjoy and really invest in them. Like do art very intentionally, write very intentionally, watch a movie and be, and say like you're going to be focused, like watch a high quality movie. I still remember like after, getting medication for OCD and having a while where the maladaptive daydream was starting to calm down, and then, I remember watching 2 movies back to back, and I was watching them so presently, and it was such an amazing experience. And I think like, don't even beat yourself up about maladaptive daydreaming, because the experience of us maladaptive daydreaming and the lack of attention we have for things is sort of, I suppose, similar to the phone addiction that most people have these days anyway. Like most people can't watch a movie and like not look at their phone, and it's not good for us like to split our attention like that, so we will feel like so much more at peace if we're able to give our focus to one thing. And when I was watching these two movies, like it was so amazing for me. At the two movies I watched were A Real Pain and The Zone of Interest. I can't remember which. They were kind of linked in what they were about. They were both about the Holocaust, and they were just really fascinating angles to take for me. So I was just, I was really fascinated by them. And again, I think if you're watching, top quality art, you can ask yourself these questions like, how did they make these choices? And, thinking about the writing, thinking about the filming of it, I'm always, when I'm at my best and like most engaged, it's always making me ask questions and think about the creators behind what I'm watching. And I think, that is where you want to be. You want to feel engaged in the world, as opposed to, constantly having your own stories on loop that you can't rid yourself of. You want to just somehow be able to clear that path and, create intentionally, watch intentionally, read intentionally. And life is slower, your mind is slower, it is more boring, but your body will feel more at peace. So that is my thoughts on this situation with boredom. And the reality is, yes, it is boring, and you might even just be asking yourself, you might be desperate to stop, and then once you've stopped, you're like, oh, like, I could be like, living another life right now. Like, why do I want to just sit here and be so bored? And, if you are like a shy person, an anxious person, if you are, somebody who struggles with loneliness, and I've struggled with all this, if you struggle to connect with people in real life, like, you're maybe not going to be able to find what you want in real life from other people. And that is where I think, engaging in art and engaging in creativity is like the positive alternative to that. And, this is another cliche, but like, you really need to become your own best friend and not beat yourself up. And, if you struggle with maladaptive daydreaming, there's a reason for it. Like, either it is, covering up some trauma, it is, a habit that you've learned, a coping mechanism you've learned, a symptom of another mental illness. Like, it's just something you're dealing with, and it's something that you can stop, and you can build something up on the other side of it. So yeah, this was kind of rambly, but I hope it's helped if you are caught between that feeling of wanting to stop maladaptive daydreaming, but also not wanting to stop because you don't want to be bored, you don't want to be sad. Yeah, it's just about slowing down, being more intentional, engaging in things, and kind of building yourself back up in another way, in a way that's kind of slower and more boring. And boredom is just, something we need to become comfortable with if we want to have healthier minds, I think. I think that will probably go for a lot of people in the world right now, like not just maladaptive daydreamers. So yeah, if you like this video, please do like and subscribe, because it really helps push it out to other people. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.